Hello, good morning, everyone. Good morning from Mexico City and good afternoon in the UK. This is Arturo Mendoza. I'm the head of higher education at the British Council in Mexico City. And I'm very happy to welcome you to this info session or info webinar for you to learn about our recently published HE Connects Grant Partnership Call, funded by the British Council through our flagship Going Global Partnerships program. Before we get into the details and the specifics of the call, there is some housekeeping that we need to share with you. To begin with, next slide, please. No, sorry. We have a banner that we're sharing with you in the chat box right now. In that banner, you will see all of our safeguarding policies because in the British Council, we basically want to create and enable open spaces for discussion. As long as we treat each other with respect, please do consider that all of your questions and comments are welcomed. Make sure you use our Q&A chat box. It's there available for you. And of course, there's also the comments box in which you can say hello or share your contact details. But I encourage you to use the Q&A chat box because at the end of the presentation, we'll have the opportunity to have an open session of Q&A. So it's going to be very useful to know which are your specific questions about the call. With no further ado, then let's start with the presentation. So to begin with, this is just a very quick overview of the demands in Mexico and the UK that we observed and that basically feed into our strategic planning and priorities in the British Council. In the case of Mexico, there is a strong interest in enabling more higher education spaces for a growing community of young people. In Mexico, based on the Constitution, access to higher education is public is free that needs to be for free, and it's a human right. So there are strong interests from Sheinbaum's administration to create partnerships and opportunities to enable more spaces in higher education for Mexican students. In the area of our work, specifically in the UK, as many of you know, most of our work, particularly our work in transnational education, is basically guided by the International Education Strategy that was launched in 2019, currently under review. However, we have some thresholds that we need to achieve by 2030, and that includes increasing the number of international students and of TNE experts. And for that same reason, most of our work is basically guided by those priorities and thresholds. Next slide, please. Um, Specifically, the British Council has its own transnational education strategy, and the main objective of this strategy is to build on the thresholds of the international education strategy that I just mentioned from the UK government. Nonetheless, we're doing this specifically targeting to main objectives such as providing better data and insights on the context of transnational education in Mexico and globally, understanding local contexts and regulatory frameworks, and enabling environments for wider cooperation between not only Mexico, but many other countries and the UK, specifically in TNE. And it's not only about enabling insights and data, but it's also about providing funding for higher education institutions to deliver actionable plans and collaborative programs with higher education institutions from Mexico and elsewhere. And to do that, we use our flagship Going Global Partnerships program, which is funded with grant in aid by the UK government. And under the umbrella of this Going Global Partnerships program is in which we have our flagship HE Connects partnerships call between Mexico and the UK. Next slide, please. So as I've mentioned, amongst the key priorities of our TNE strategy in the British Council is to enable insights, research, better data for higher education institutions to have a better understanding of challenges and opportunities around transnational education and collaborative actions with Mexico and other countries. Specifically with Mexico, we've been producing several reports since 2022, starting from our guide on TNE partnerships with Mexico, followed by an A-specific annex, country-based annex, in which we basically are providing extra information based on the demands of higher education institution from Mexico for collaboration with the UK. And we use our partnership with the National Association of Universities and Higher Education Institutions in Mexico to survey over 70 higher education institutions that kindly provided very good insights to deliver this annex that I've mentioned. And later this year, we will produce a third document specifically on micro-credentials and how to enable links between higher education and employment and industries, which is also amongst the key priorities that we've seen not only from Mexico but also in the UK in terms of upskilling and providing access opportunities in the tertiary education sector to students from underserved communities and indigenous groups. So the next slide, please. With all this data and insights that we've been able to deliver and produced, we've identified that specifically in collaboration with Mexico, there is clear evidence of ongoing work already in certain TNE delivery models, which are doable and actionable in the short term. Specifically, I'm talking about distance and online learning, because many of the higher education institutions across Mexico already have the infrastructure to offer online and distance learning. And also, specifically in areas such as PhD, there are already dual degrees that are being offered by higher education institutions from Mexico and the UK. There also are very specific TNE interventions, particularly from private universities in Mexico, that are basically already delivering even more complex TNE delivery models, but are not necessarily observed in the largest territory of the Mexican Republic. And those other TNE delivery models, which are in the orange box, are potential areas of cooperation that might be delivered more in the medium and long term once there is some sort of alignment between frameworks and priorities from Mexico and the UK. Um, I think that it stopped sharing the slides, right? Or can you see the slides right now? I don't think so. There you go. Liliana, can you please confirm that we are sharing the screen at this moment?
Yes, but it's a different PowerPoint, so just hold on a second.
I'm going to be sharing this slide now, and I'll take the control. There you go. So it's important to let you know that all this data, all these insights that we've produced, it's not only for you to learn about the context that we are observing in Mexico and the UK, but it's also for you, higher education institutions across Mexico and the UK, to use this data for you to action plans of collaboration with partner higher education institutions from Mexico. And to do that, as I've mentioned, we use our flagship Going Global Partnership Program, which is basically the main tool that we are using to fund partnerships between universities and organizations from the tertiary sector. And to do that, what we are doing is the design of this specific call to enable TNE partnerships between Mexico and the UK, particularly with a focus to enable the internationalization of the tertiary education and UK qualifications, adding up to the discussion of which are the regulatory frameworks that we have in Mexico and in the UK, which are the potential areas of collaboration and the agreements that can be reached between universities of Mexico and the UK based on those regulations and contexts. So the HE Connect School is open right now and will be open until the 30th of July. We will be funding up to 5 new UK-Mexico partnerships for a 12-month period, which projects will be starting in January 2026. Which is the eligibility criteria? Well, to begin with, it's open to higher education institutions from Mexico and the UK only. The UK university needs to have the capacity to receive and administer the grant from the British Council and to lead on all reporting and monitoring of the project from start to end. And please be mindful that this year we are using a new digital platform for the submission of your applications. In previous years, all applications were sent to a specific email, and then we basically acknowledge receipt of those applications. Now everything it's gonna be worked through our platform, our Good Grants platform. So make sure you register first, then select HE Connects as your option, and then complete and submit your applications through the platform. We will not be welcoming applications through any other mean. So take your time. Do consider that this is the first time that we're using the platform, so there may be some challenges. So do not leave the submission at the end. Try to send it before in case that there are some technical issues. We can fix them and help you. Also, amongst the other eligibility requirements is that one of your partner needs to be Mexican, a Mexican institution, and that Mexican institution will be the co-leader, and you need to incorporate the Mexican institution in the co-design and co-implementation of the project. Uh, Both institutions, the leading in the UK and the co-leading in Mexico, need to provide support letters from delegated authorities within these institutions. And there is a possibility for you to incorporate associate organizations that are, let's say, sector bodies, industry bodies that might be part of the project delivery. There are some specifications about the list of potential associate organizations that you can include. But for example, what we've observed from previous implementation is that there are many associate sector bodies such as QAA or the Scottish Founding Council. I mean, that there is a possibility for you to include those regulatory bodies or policy actors to the project delivery and to feed into the outputs and outcomes that you are planning to achieve. And now let's talk about those outcomes, which is amongst the most important piece of information that you need to consider when preparing your application and submitting. You can choose any of these four specific outcomes. You need to guarantee that at least one of these outcomes is being covered by your application. There is the option for you, if you want to be more ambitious, that you can pick even two or even three, but at least you need to have one of these as part of the application that you will be submitting with your Mexican partner. Which are amongst the outcomes that you can include in your application is, let's say, the design and the publication of strategies for internationalization, and that includes toolkits and mentoring for staff from international offices at higher education institutions. This was one of the most important demands from those universities in Mexico that are just starting their journey of internationalization and could benefit from insights and feedback from partnering with other institutions and organizations to set up the conditions for them to have an international education strategy within their institution. So that's the audience that basically demanded this outcome. Now, there are other institutions that can use this funding to produce or to work on deep dialogues, to assess institutional capacity and resources for internationalization, or to map HE courses and credits for potential delivery of joint curricula. Now, this is more in, for example, institutions that already have identified a specific partner that they have been working with for several years. Most of them, for example, coming from research collaboration that now want to translate all that research into joint teaching. And in order to do that, there needs to be a mapping of credits, curricula. So we've been supporting several projects through HE Connect since 2023 that are basically focusing on these sort of deep dialogues and assessments. Another outcome that you can achieve with HE Connects is, the production of panels and events to feed into the awareness and understanding of regulatory frameworks and context. Just to put you an example, yesterday I joined a joint panel between Flaxo and Portsmouth with the Ministry of Education of Mexico, in which, the purpose was to present which is the regulatory context that we have in Mexico and in the UK for the recognition of HE qualifications, and they are enabling this community of practice with HE Connects funding. So this is another sort of objective that you can cover with the grant. And another outcome that you can achieve with HE Connect, for example, is to design and operate one specific UK-Mexico joint teaching program. And this goes for those institutions that already got a very consolidated partnership, that they have already identified the program that they are keen to offer jointly, and they are just looking to find ways and tools and institutional buy-in to deliver this sort of joint offer and programs. So again, you can pick any of these. It all depends on where you are in the journey of internationalization and what's the nature of your relationship with your Mexican or UK partner. And based on that, you will be able to pick amongst any of these outcomes available for you to deliver. And also throughout implementation, be mindful of all the considerations and policies that the British Council has in matters of safeguarding, environment, equality, diversity and inclusion, and gender equality in STEM. You will find all those guidelines and all those principles in the application guidelines. In case that you have any sort of questions, then just drop us an email and we will be more than happy to help you to understand what are those policies and how do we think you need to embed this into the application. Uh, Also be mindful throughout the delivery of your application and your project that you need to effectively communicate the delivery, the implementation, and the results of your project with not only project-based audiences, but also with wider communities within your higher education institutions, connecting with your authorities, with your offices of international cooperation, because the main purpose is for us to some sort of guarantee certain scalability of this intervention for future collaboration between Mexico and the UK. So communication is very important. There's going to be a very specific section in the application form that will give you some insight about how to deliver this communication plan. And the difference between the application process that we had before and the one that we have now is that the platform, the Good Grants platform, basically enables examples of the kind of information that you can put in your application. So you wouldn't need to. It's not going to be rocket science. You will be able to pick amongst many options available. So it shouldn't be as painful as it was before, hopefully. Now, in terms of implementation, you also need to be mindful of duty of care. As you will be able to see in the eligible costs of the call, you can use part of that funding to pay for international travel and mobility. If you are doing this, do consider that the FCDO has a travel advice that changes every month or is updated every month. So you need to take a look to that before planning your travel to Mexico or to the UK. Also, you need to be mindful of any sort of updates from local authorities in Mexico in case that you're planning to go to the UK. So again, all of this is very relevant for you to put into the risk assessment section of your application if you are planning to travel to certain states. If your collaboration is with Mexico City or central zone of Mexico, there's not big deal. I mean, it's very common to travel to Mexico City. It's safe. But if there is, mobility for other states, then maybe you will need to double check that information with the advice from the authorities of Mexico and the UK, respectively. In terms of the breakdown budget, you will find that in the website of HE Connects, There's going to be everything you'll need to complete the application, not only the guideline, but also the grant budget template of Excel that you'll need to complete and to upload onto the Good Grants platform once you get to that point. So my advice is for you to download this template from the HE Connects website, complete the template with your partner in Mexico and the UK. And then once you get to that or reach that point in the Good Grants platform, then upload this document onto the platform. Some of the considerations or the do's that you need to think about when completing your breakdown budget is that you need to invest in your communication plan and marketing. As I just mentioned, this is a very important piece of delivery in terms of the project. You need to include any match or supplementary funding that participant higher education institutions would like to add to the project delivery. Please do consider that this is not going to be part of the assessment of the application. I mean, it's not that if you are giving money to the project, then you'll have extra points. That's not the way it works, but it's good to know if there's going to be some sort of extra support because that could also help us to understand better the scale of the reach that higher education institutions are planning for collaborating on this project. Also, please, again, as I've mentioned about international travel and subsistence, you need to be very strategic on the spend because it's capped. I mean, you cannot use you can only use certain percentage of the total grant for international travel. So you need to be very strategic on how you use it and make the best use you can from digital platforms that you may have, to reach wider audiences and to share your message with the many people as you can in one way or another. And also do include all international bank transfer costs under miscellaneous because I mean part of the collaborative work that you will have with your Mexican partner in case of the UK who is going to be receiving the funds or the grant from the British Council is that you will need to have some sort in place an agreement between you and the Mexican higher education institution for the Mexican higher education institution to benefit from that funding too. So if in case that there is the need of transfers or pay for bank transfers, then you need to include that forecast in your breakdown budget. And which are the downs? Again, do not exceed the caps that you have per section. I mean, there are caps for international travel, for expertise costs from the UK, the kind of amount that you're using to pay for permanent project staff costs. And very important, do not include domestic travel in your allocation for travel and subsistence. And subsistence, all those domestic travels should go to operation and activity costs. So having said this, these are like the most important do's and don'ts, but I know that once you're working in the breakdown budget, many other questions might arise. So make sure you drop us a line and we will be more than happy to guide you through this Excel template that sometimes might be overwhelming, but I really hope that it's straightforward. It's using, several colors. So you will have, some sort of indication that you are exceeding the caps. And I mean, there's no much margin of error in terms of completing the breakdown budget. About the assessment criteria this year compared to previous year of HE Connects, we are keeping it simple. We are only having three criterias. Each of those criteria can have, the max of 20 points. And, the most perfect project would be a 60 points project. But those are the criteria that we are choosing at this point, which is project quality and relevance, methodology, proposal and project design, and sustainability and capacity building. Again, as you can see, we are not considering the term the matchmaking or the supplementary funds from higher education institutions amongst those criteria. We're not even consider previously established partnerships between the UK and Mexico because we know that there may be some universities that are starting the journey of internationalization. So we really want to have an even ground for all sorts of universities to compete for this funding. And last but not least, also you will find in the application guideline more specific details of what do we mean by project quality and relevance, methodology. I mean, it's not only a generic term. I mean, there are specific lines that you need to consider that are going to be taken into consideration also by the panel, which is going to be an internal panel, which will be part of, part of our members of the country, regional and country teams will be part of this assessment panel once we get the final applications. The key dates that you need to consider, well, we're having all those info sessions at this point. Next week, we're having another info session for higher education institutions, particularly for Mexican higher education institutions, because it's going to be conducted in Spanish and pretty late in the UK. So unless you love HE Connects in the UK and want to practice your Spanish, I think that it's going to be very late for you to connect to this Spanish session. But if you already got your Mexican partner, do consider, encouraging those partners to join the session of next week, because sometimes they might feel a bit more comfortable listening about this call in Spanish and asking their questions in Spanish. The deadline for the submission of application is going to be July the 30th, as I've mentioned. I think that I don't know if you received my email when I announced the publication of this call. I think that I made a minor mistake and I put the 31st of July. So do be mindful that the actual date is the 30th of July as it's presented in this slide and as it's included in the application guidelines. It's the 30th of July and it's going to be closing 1 minute before midnight in the UK. And the results will be announced on September the 5th. The contract signs between September and October, and then we're going to have the period of contracting during November. The point here is that we have everything done before Christmas break, and then you can start project delivery swiftly and without concerns of budgeting or money by January 2026 as it's scheduled. So with no further ado, then I think that it's safe to move to the Q&A sessions. So to work on these Q&A sessions, I know that some of you incorporated some of your questions in the chat box. Moni, I don't know if you would like to to share some of these questions that you are seeing right now in the Q&A section, and I can get through and I can answer those questions.
Yes, Arturo, thank you. So far, we have 14 questions posted on the chat Q&A chat, and the first one comes from Melanie Morris. Is this an annual call?
Well, this has been an annual call since 2023. I mean, as you can see, we are testing the sort of implementation of the TNE strategy that we have in the British Council. The TNE strategy of the British Council will have a revision by 2025. So at this point, I know that we're going to have these 3 years of HE Connects, but then later we may have a revision of the kind of projects that we will be delivering from 2026 on. So at this point, my recommendation is for you to take advantage of HE Connects this year, and let's hope to have many applications and 5 very good projects by the end of this calendar year.
Thank you. Next question from Gabriel Alberto. Are research programs collaborations included in the grant?
Formally, research collaborations, as we understand them, are not included in the grant. I mean, because those were listed amongst the outcomes of the call. The outcomes of the call are those 4 squares. So you really need to focus on at least one of those 4 outcome squares. Now, there is some evidence that there are lots of ongoing research collaborations between Mexican and UK higher education institutions. And the purpose is not to forget about all the work that has been already done, but to use all that level of understanding that institutions already have for you to think about joint teaching programs or TNE delivery models that can benefit a bigger number of students from the Mexico and the UK. So in that purpose, all applications would really need to focus on TNE and internationalization towards those ends and those outcomes.
And the next question, must it only be UK, Mexico, or could it include other Latin or South American institutions?
Well, I mean, the primary focus here is obviously to enable UK and Mexico partnerships, but we know that I mean borders aren't drawn in red. I mean you can see that there is ongoing collaboration with many other countries. The key thing that you need to consider is that you need to guarantee that your leading institution is from the UK and your co-leading institution is from Mexico. Now, as for the associate organizations that participate in your project, now I think that sky is the limit. And those associate organizations can be from the UK, from Mexico, or even elsewhere. If they, fit into the project design and the project implementation, I would say that, they are welcome to work with you.
Thank you, Arturo. And next question from Celia Lopez. Does this program include graduate schools and students?
Well, I mean, the main purpose is basically to help graduate students and undergraduate students, right? I think that I need to be more specific on what I meant about, Mexican and UK priorities, and I'll focus more on the Mexican priorities because it's kind of the thing that we want to help with in terms of the granting aid that we are using to pay for these grants. What we observed is that there is a growing community of young Mexicans that in the next few years will demand access to higher education. And there is not sufficient offer right now in the Mexican system to help those students. What the Mexican government has been doing is not only to grow the HE infrastructure, but also to demand from higher education institutions to think more widely and to incorporate online and distance learning for a bigger number of students from Mexico to benefit from a higher education institution. Our goal with HE Connects is to fit with all this and to enable opportunities of internationalization from home, particularly through distance and online learning or joint programs, because we know that a big number of Mexicans will not have the resources nor the funding to travel to the UK. So we, as the British Council, we keep active projects in terms of alumni, international student mobility, and scholarships, but at the same time, we are enabling these environments and spaces for other sorts of cooperation to enable internationalization from home. And all of this thinking is at the heart of HE Connects and what we are trying to achieve together.
Thank you, Arturo. Vanessa Johnson is asking, can you elaborate on the definition of joint program? I will post in the chat the link to the annex to the TNE guide with the full document with all these definitions that are useful for everyone and some examples. And then we will go on the other question from Ed Barley. Is there an ideal duration of deliveries partnerships? Are we looking at one-off or are we aiming to build sustainable strategies collaborations?
Yeah, no, definitely we are aiming at building sustainable collaboration. So that's why if you already got contacts with a specific partner institution, I encourage you to use those contacts and to pick some of those priorities that you've already discussed with those partners. Because I think that, as I've mentioned, it would all depend on where you are in the journey of internationalization. If you're relatively new, then you will be looking for a very fresh new partnership. But if you've already been walking through this journey for many years, then try to pick everything that you've already done and try to connect it with the outcomes of the call so you can be aligned with the objectives and the outcomes of this call specifically. And going back to the question of the joint program, and thank you, Monica. Yes, please do share these guides and annexes because they are free. They are for free. Access is free. But the difference between, let's say, a joint and dual program is that the dual program, the participant higher education institutions, each of them give their own certificate, meaning that you will have one paper with the logo of the UK and another paper with the logo of the Mexican Uni. The joint program is more tricky because it includes the logo of the two institutions in the same document. So in terms of regulations and institutional frameworks, it has been proven to be a little bit more complex than having separate certificates in which each institution has control of its own certification process.
Thank you, Arturo. Next question from Omar Licandro. In the case of a dual degree agreement, it is expected that the Mexican students will pay overseas fees in the UK.
Well, I think that this is a very good question, and it's a very good question that you could possibly assess as one of the outcomes of the HE Connects projects, meaning once you are sitting with your partner, then let's discuss how can we make this possible? And would that include paying fees for Mexican students, which is going to be the kind of support that we would like to enable to them? We're only talking about one digital offer of one module that is going to be included in one specific postgraduate program. I think those are the difficult questions that need to be made. And those are the kind of dialogues and discussions that you can have with the funding of HE Connects. So my answer to you is going to be I encourage you to use this funding to work with your partner on all of these details, because the answer might be yes. The UK partner might say, yes, I will be asking for a specific contribution for this. And the others are going to say, no, my partnership is so important that it's more in other area, let's say reciprocity, the number of Brits that benefit from the Mexican program and the Mexican students that benefit from the UK program too. So use this funding, to have those discussions with your partners. You are on mute, Moni.
Thank you. Next question from Aristides. Joint curricula, can this be for activities such as summer schools and/or student exchange programs?
Yeah, I think that it would all depend on the strategic priorities of your institutions. We've learned about many summer schools, for example, in terms of medical science. There are many summer schools from the UK institutions that are really open to students from many countries and are basically looking, to enable this sort of collaborations with them. So I think that it's not only about one specific program. It's not only about master's or PhD or undergraduate. It can also be short-term projects. It could only be, as I've mentioned before, it could be only one module, in one specific project or program. I mean, it would all depend on your capacity and on your priorities. There are very small institutions that wouldn't be in the capacity to deliver something big. So they maybe would like to focus more on, let's at least have a global community for my Mexican students to learn about, the UK aerospace ecosystem in one class, and that's it. And there are going to be others that are going to say, we have the capacity to, think big and, send an X number of students to the UK every summer or every year, and some Brits coming to Mexico every year. So again, it would all depend on the capacity and the priorities of your institution.
Thank you, Arturo. We have a question from Camila Vergara that is very similar to the previous one, but she asked if the summer school in Mexico counts as a joint teaching program, or does it need to be a degree granting program?
Well, formally what we're trying to nurture is, to enable more HE qualifications for Mexican students. But what we have learned from our insights and report that I've shared with you, and that, I think it's going to be more clear once we have our third insights and report on micro-credential, is that thinking about higher education goes beyond having a master's, a PhD, and undergraduate. Actually, there is now an increasing demand on micro-credentials and thinking about higher education institutions in having several points of access depending on the journey of your life in which you are, and thinking about higher education as lifelong learning. If you consider all of these as part of a more holistic approach to higher education, then you will see that sky is the limit and that your corporation can focus on even one specific formal higher education qualification like a master's or a PhD, or to go more into a nano credential or to a micro credential that you will have on a specific skill on a specific thing, and that's also going to be very important and valid for your day to day in the labor market or in the industry. So going back to your question is that, again, it all depends on your priorities, on your approach to higher education, how's your understanding of higher education, and that understanding will need to be based on the regulatory context that your institution has, the framework of cooperation that you will have with the UK, and the facilities that the governments in Mexico and the UK.
Internationalization strategy.
Yes, definitely. I mean, what we've observed from previous implementation of HE Connects, as I've mentioned, HE Connects was implemented since 2023. It began with a pilot, a regional pilot with Mexico and Brazil. Then it evolved into a Mexican specific call in 2024. And now it's again a Mexican specific call, right? So what we've observed from the two previous years of implementation is that the biggest amount of projects that were funded were in partnership with a private or with private Mexican higher education institutions, which speaks, strongly about the sort of capacities that private institutions already have to collaborate internationally, right? However, the insights and data that have been produced and that Monica will be sharing with you in the chat and that are also included in the presentation that will be shared with you at the end of this call is that there is eagerness from public higher education institutions, not only eagerness, but need from them to partner internationally to deliver their objectives. And many of these institutions already got the infrastructure, the strategy to work internationally. The biggest challenges that they're facing is that they do not have the links or the networks to work on plans of collaboration with the UK. They may have some good links with the US due to the closeness that we have with the US market, or even with Latin American institutions, but the links with the UK are not that strong enough. So I think that what we're trying to do with HE Connects 25, sorry, is not that we would like to benefit the public institutions, because as I said, it's open to everyone, to any sort of institutions. But we definitely would like to learn from what we've seen in the research and insights, and to see and observe some sort of meaningful change in the number of applications that we are receiving from public higher education institutions too.
Thank you, Arturo. This is a very common question that we receive every year and by email. So this is from anonymous attendee. Our university is interested in participating in this call, but we haven't had success in reaching out a UK partner. Do you have a list of UK higher education institutions that are interested in participating in this call with Mexican higher education institutions? Thank you and greetings.
This is, as Monica said, a very, very common question. And, I'm going to confess that unfortunately, we do not have a formal matchmaking tool. I mean, there is not sort of a website in which you say, hi, my name is X University, and I'm looking for anyone from Mexico interested in working with me. In terms of receiving some sort of information of potential areas of cooperation from certain higher education institutions, the British Council has an awareness of a very small number of this. I mean, I can tell you that I have a list of 6 universities that have contacted me, saying like, okay, I'm looking for someone in this area, right? And I can share that with you via email if you drop me a message, right? But I think that this is amongst the biggest challenge that we are facing at this point in terms of the matchmaking. And what we are trying to do is to use the network of institutions and higher education organizations that exist in both Mexico and the UK. So what we are doing at this point, for example, is that all this list of higher education institutions that I said that is very small, what I'm going to do is to share it with Anuyes, with the objective that Anuyes can cascade all this information throughout the whole membership. And then you can learn if you are an Anuyes member, which is, a very big association. We're also going to be sharing this with AMPE. You can learn about these sort of institutions that might be looking for someone in a specific discipline. But again, there is no some sort of formal sort of recommendation on matchmaking that I can make in terms of you work with this or you work with that, because we do not have access to that information either.
Next question from Julia. How many Mexican universities are allowed to include in the project?
As much as you can. I mean, there have been very straightforward projects in which is one Mexican, one Brit, and that's it. But there are others in which you have three Mexican, one Brit. I've never seen more than one UK university in a project, but I've definitely seen, more than three higher education institutions from Mexico. There are other projects that, as they are doing map curricula and credit map, and as you know, some of the governance bodies within higher education institutions, when they are mapping the curricula, they need comments from the industry. So some of the projects have even incorporated specific businesses or representatives of the private sector to feed into the project. That's also possible because if you're, let's say, in Mexico at this point, it's very important the area of chips, microchips, and semiconductors, right? So if you're going to be working on a specific project or program in mapping curricula for a joint program in that area, then maybe you will need to incorporate the views from specific actors in the industry. So you can have your Mexican partner in the university, the UK partner in a university, plus representatives of industry, plus representatives of other academic communities. So again, that's possible, and you are the ones that are going to define the number of associate partnerships that you will have in the project.
Thanks, Arturo. The next question from Elliot. Can the funding also be used to training, for example, respective language courses or the staff involved in the exchange?
Yes, I mean, this can be used for mentoring, particularly for all those actors that are involved in the internationalization of your university. Sometimes it's not only the Office of Internationalization. I mean, it's very common that we think about internationalization, that you have one or two people working in the office of the international exchange, and that's it. But that's not the case when you're talking about the wider community in your university, in which you have ambassadors of internationalization. You may have students that have benefited from mobility scheme. You may have scholars, faculty that have participated in mobility schemes or that work internationally with peers in the UK or elsewhere. So all that ecosystem is part of your international community. And all that ecosystem can benefit from mentoring, from training tools, for them to keep being the ambassadors of international collaboration with your institution. And all of them can even become your committee or your board to work on the international education strategy of your institution. So again, yes, you can use this for training, but again, capacity building, focus on enabling internationalization.
Thanks, Arturo. Next question. Do you include delivery of short courses, CPD type courses into your TNE definition? For example, 5-day upskilling courses?
Yes, again, I mean, it all depends on your approach to higher education and your understanding of qualifications. But I mean, there is, for example, AMPE, specifically AMPE, which is another association of Mexican higher education institutions and actors, are right now, let's say, working strongly on COIL. So they've been asking a lot whether COIL is part of TNE. That's also part of the wider understanding of higher education institutions beyond the traditional thinking of having one student traveling to another country physically. So when you are talking about distance learning, online learning, digital infrastructure, digital literacy, it doesn't matter if it's, 2 years master's, 1 year undergraduate, or 2 months certificate. All of that is part of the same family, which is, an enabling environment for internationalization from home, for a bigger number of students, bigger audiences, reaching out to underserved communities that would never have the opportunity to take a plane and study a formal master's or PhD abroad.
Thank you. Next question. Considering that the COIL program is part of our university internationalization strategy, may the grants be used to support post-COIL projects?
Yeah, I think that this connects with the question on scalability, right? If you already got a very clear plan of what you want to achieve through a specific call intervention, and then you need to work on the next steps, then I think that your applications can build on how are you planning to achieve those scales, which is the sort of agreements that you will need to have in place with the UK partner, which are going to be the impacts and the reach that you're going to have through those next steps. And I think that it's going to be part of activating a specific UK Mexico project.
Thank you, Arturo. A question from Laura Morin. Which language the program should be delivered?
The application needs to be completed in English, and it needs to be submitted by the UK lead through the Good Grants platform. However, it needs to be completed in collaboration with the Mexican partner. So that's in terms of the application. In terms of the delivery of the project, well, I think it's going to be mostly in English, right? Because unfortunately, there is not much awareness of Spanish language in the UK. So most of the people and scholars working from UK universities will conduct themselves in English. So there needs to be some sort of level of proficiency in English from the Mexican partner to guarantee that there's going to be a good understanding with your British peers and colleagues.
Thank you, Arturo. Next question from Bithan. Is the program open to UK further education colleges or just universities?
I mean, this is also a very recurrent question, and I think that we are thinking, as you can see in the call, it says higher education institutions because it basically easier to put it that way, but we are trying to think more about tertiary organizations and the whole universe that it includes. In Mexico, this is a very important question too, because there is a very active subsystem that is also eager to work internationally. And as they are not formally considered as autonomous universities or as higher education private universities, sometimes they think, I'm not sure if I'm part of all this universe. The answer is yes, you are part of all this universe. You are enabling skills for future generations. You are working on tertiary education certification. So yes, the answer is we need to have a wider understanding of the tertiary sector and incorporate not only the system, but also subsystems, the skills and the employability aim of understanding higher education institution more widely.
Thank you. Next question from Carla Sedano. The institutional contribution can be in kind. I'm thinking in the comms activities, our internal communication team at UNAM can do them. Will that internal budget be considered as in-kind contribution?
Yes, yes, definitely. And I encourage you to think about this in your budget breakdown. You will see that in the budget breakdown, you'll have, let's say, my line is salary for Guadalupe Lopez, right? And you were going to put how much of the grant I'm taking to pay for this salary. And let's say how much of this salary is basically being paid by the local institution. That would be in kind, right? So you will have the opportunity to have that breakdown so we can see that you're putting part of your own efforts, of your own resources. And that's very valuable to know because that also gives us an idea of the level of involvement that your faculty is having, that your authorities are already aware that you're going to be using part of your time that is being paid by UNAM or by a Mexican higher education institution in this project. So again, you will have the opportunity to do that breakdown in the budget and do so, please.
Thanks, Arturo. Next question. Is the Mexican government supporting dual degrees and the requirements in the UK? I am asking as we have tried this model with other Latin American universities, and it has proven incredibly difficult, especially for public institutions, and we have them based on exchange, not commercial. Thanks, Ale from Northumbria University.
Yeah, this is a very good question. Let's go to the, and I know that we are getting to the end of the call, but I think this is very important because there is a light of hope at the end of my comment. Okay, so bear with me. In terms of policy sector, as you may know, a few years ago, the governments of Mexico and the UK signed an MOU to enable the recognition of higher education qualifications. However, the protocols of implementations were never signed, and then the Mexican administrations and the British administrations changed. So what we have is a document that was signed, but there is not sort of application of anything that was signed many years ago. However, what we have now is a very nurtured environment of higher education institutions that are working of their own regulatory contexts at their institutions to deliver this sort of offers. Now, do consider that in Mexico, once you get a UK qualification and you get to the labor market, unless that we're talking about a very specific discipline such as medicine and law, we are not required to revalidate or to have the recognition of this qualification from the Ministry of Education. There is already an ongoing process that you can work out with the Ministry of Education and have that validation. But it's not a requirement once you get to the labor market. Again, unless this is a very specific discipline as law and medicine. So what has happened in practice is that there is a very fluid understanding between UK and Mexico in terms of UK qualifications because they can operate all this stuff without a very specific framework on this. I'm not saying that it's the perfect environment to work collaboratively in higher education. But again, I think that there have been ways in which institutions have been able to deliver all this due to the lack of clarity that we have at this point at the policy level. So what we're trying to do in terms of HE Connects is to enable to all this understanding. All the frameworks that are already now, Mexico has a very new framework of the recognition of HE qualifications. And I think that what we're trying to do is to raise awareness about the many things that still need to be discussed that would eventually need to lead us to reactivating an MOU and to have clearer guidelines of how we need to work these sort of programs in the future. This is something that we do not have right now, but we can become the ambassadors of these issues, of these topics. And that's part of the many objectives that HE Connects wants to achieve in the short term, in the longer term.
Thank you, Arturo. I'm afraid we only have a time for one more question, and we will encourage you to please send us your questions if your answer wasn't responded to an email that I will be posting in the chat. And our last question is from Shannon. It's would collaborate online international learning COIL fall into the online learning category, and will a COIL-focused projects will be eligible in this funding round?
That was easy. The answer is yes.
Okay, great. Thank you, Arturo, and thank you everyone for joining us today. We still have so much questions we didn't answer, but we will do our best to answer them by email as soon as we get them.
Super. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.